What do Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy have to do with sustainability? We'll find out as we talk to the founder of the real Green New Deal project next.
Calling. Call the GrowthBusters. Whoa.
I'm Dave Gardner, and here's another exciting episode of the GrowthBusters podcast, where we come to terms with limits to growth. We have outgrown the planet, and she is not going to put up with it much longer. We need to right-size the scale of the human enterprise so future generations have a shot at living decent lives. If you're trying to recover from growth addiction, or you know someone who needs to, this podcast can provide support. For cutting-edge information about our culture's unsustainable love affair with growth and what we can do about it, visit growthbusters.org. In Our Renewable Future, Post-Carbon Institute analysis concluded it will be practically impossible to transition modern society away from fossil fuels to renewables without radically scaling back our appetite for energy. Doing that is rarely discussed. Yet the 2019 U.S. House resolution calling for a Green New Deal states it's the duty of the U.S. federal government to create millions of good, high-wage jobs and ensure prosperity and economic security for all people of the United States, while meeting 100% of the power demand in the United States through clean, renewable, and zero-emission energy sources. Now, while these are noble goals, my guest on the podcast today thinks they're unrealistic, if not totally crazy. Her name is Megan Seibert, and she is executive director of the real Green New Deal project. Our conversation begins with an explanation of the project.
We're pushing back against the mainstream narrative about climate change and renewable energy and sustainability. A lot of what we're being told is that climate change is just the singular problem, and that the way to fix it is just through this simple technological fix. So basically, our whole central goal is to change the narrative about renewable energy, sustainability, and climate change, away from this kind of fantastical, feel-good myth to something more grounded in reality.
How did this start? What happened, and what was the genesis of this?
Yes, so, it basically started when I was in graduate school, getting my master's degree. I wasn't studying this explicitly. I was, studying system science as it pertained to sustainability in general. But for whatever reason, this was just always, the whole energy transition thing was always in the back of my mind. And at some point, I would say just maybe a few months into grad school, I just kind of had this general intuitive epiphany or knowing that renewables weren't renewable, and that, everything we were sold about kind of the sustainability narrative was just really feel good, and that there wasn't substance and that there were holes in it. And I tried talking to some people in grad school about it, but always got a lot of pushback. So again, even though I didn't study it, it was just always in the back of my mind. I was more concerned about that than anything else, anything else that I was studying. And it wasn't until I was wrapping up grad school and I finally had a conversation one day with actually somebody who was on my thesis committee, and I said, I'm not seeing anybody in the world who's actually saying the truth about this. I'm not seeing any organization that's tackling this head on. I'm seeing some organizations that are tackling certain parts of it, but even those certain parts that they're touching, they're kind of dancing around it, but not really saying the full truth head on. Mm-hmm. And I said, is it kind of precocious of me to try to go at this on my own? I'm just a nobody. And, he said, go for it. And so that was 4 years ago, and here we are.
Did Alexandra OcasioCortez have anything to do with the next level?
So I think she really kind of came into the public eye big time. I want to say, 2019 is when I recall her really coming into the public eye. And in 2019, I was about a year away from launching Real GND. I was still trying to get it off the ground with other organizations.
But you already had that name?
I was at the point where I had an old name, and I'd kind of gotten some feedback that, maybe it was just kind of like a generic name and it wasn't catchy enough. It was just, I was seeing stuff about, Green New Deal everywhere. And so that's what, put the little idea in my head that maybe we just call this the real Green New Deal.
Okay, so that helped you with the name, but that wasn't what sparked the whole thought process.
Exactly.
Okay.
No, it wasn't. So I was concerned about this really in 2014, 2015, 2016, before AOC was ever on the stage.
Interesting.
Yeah. So she just helped with the name, and that's all.
Yeah.
I think it immediately conveys something specific that people can latch on to and understand, or at least I hope.
Would you say that everything about the real Green New Deal is in response to the Green New Deal?
No, it's not necessarily in response to it, because I think the narrative that the Green New Deal legislation specifically that it embodies has been around before, obviously before the Green New Deal legislation was ever written.
Yeah.
So that narrative was around for a long time, but AOC and that name just kind of put in a little tidy package on it and put it out to the world and actually made it something.
Well, could you see her becoming an ally?
She and Ed Markey were the two kind of big names behind writing that legislation. I haven't reached out to them yet. I certainly will at some point. I like to think that there's always an opportunity to at least try to build a bridge with anybody. But it is disturbing to see AOC's deviation over the last couple of years. So I don't know.
So do you think she had some good ideas, but she doesn't know the full set of facts?
Well, regarding the Green New Deal, yes, I would say, I don't know her whole life history, but my guess is that she's somebody who, probably the average person who's not particularly ecologically literate. And this was something that was put in front of her, and she didn't know any better. And she's like a lot of people, they don't know any better. They're not very environmentally or ecologically literate. And so this comes in front of them. They go, oh, that sounds great. This sounds lovely. Yeah, let's go for it. So I would just say she probably didn't know any better.
Well, I'm thinking Joe Biden probably doesn't know everything that you know.
Correct. Yeah. And of course, then there's also corrupted interests that are contributing to that not knowing. But yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Probably if you went through the halls of Congress of the United States, and gave everybody a 12-question quiz to find out how fully knowledgeable they are about overshoot and potential solutions, do you think anybody would pass that test?
No, probably very few.
Yeah.
And I think, for example, a friend of mine has brought to my attention recently, I think there's one U.S. congressperson who's a scientist who has a PhD. And I've tried reaching out to him and, no response. But my guess is that just like the average American, the average congressperson is not at all ecologically literate, because we're just so steeped in this dysfunctional, detached growth paradigm.
I think it's pretty clear that it's not in their political interest to know the full facts. And if they did, it wouldn't be in their political interest to speak the full truth.
Oh, absolutely, which is precisely why, and this is one of the things we advocate for under the policy recommendation section of our website, is it is absolutely essential that we either or both get money out of politics. And I think part of the way you do that is, in parallel, we have to start electing people into office who are not establishment Democrats and establishment Republicans who are beholden to corporate interests. So long as we keep electing those people into office, whether it's local, state, or federal, they're going to have a vested interest in not understanding these things and not wanting to talk about them even if they did understand them. And of course, it does go beyond just money, too. I mean, I had a conversation recently with an old friend who's a state rep in the Ohio legislature, and just a really good person who really means well. Mm-hmm. I don't know how he raised his money for his campaign, but talking about this with him, it's the first time he's heard about it. And, oh, gosh, I can't say that, and I can't say that. So whether it's corporate or moneyed interests that are getting in the way of it, even if that's not at play, there's still the, oh shit, even if I really did get behind what you're saying and really believe what you're saying, I can't say that to my constituents. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, about how we treat people like children. And we feel like we have to tiptoe around them and treat them with kid gloves. And God forbid we actually speak the truth to them, difficult truths.
Do you think somebody could someone run for national office and have their platform be, okay, here's the honest truth that you need to know.
Yes.
Elect me, even though it's, probably uncomfortable news. It's as inconvenient a truth as there can be. Elect me because you need somebody who is willing to do what it takes to navigate that.
Yes, yeah. And we need people with the balls to step forward and do that, to run on what might be an unpopular platform. But I guarantee you there are people out there who would latch onto that. There are more people than we would think who would be accepting of somebody just being brave and gutsy and stepping forward and speaking the truth. And I have to say, looking at the last presidential election cycle, the one person who stood out to me, and I think there are a couple of others, but the one who really stood out to me as having the potential to do that was Marianne Williamson. I think she is incredibly open-minded, incredibly open-hearted. I think she clearly understands the issue of money in politics and the corruption that results from that. I think she would have the guts to speak difficult truths, and she did speak a lot of difficult truths in her campaign. So somebody like Marianne Williamson gives me a lot of hope. If she can stay in this, and if we can have more people like her who have the courage to step forward and say, you know what, I'm just going to speak these things, even if it scares some people.
I just find that really fascinating to think about. The people are electing people who tell them what they think they want to hear, and they want to hear that the American dream is alive and well and that we can go on having more toys and more trips and bigger houses and making more money. Economic growth is the ultimate God.
Right.
That's what people want to hear. I mean, almost every politician promises robust economic growth.
Right. And I would push back against that and say, I would guess that it's obviously hard to put a number to it, but I would say about half of the populace comes from the place you just described. Mm-hmm. And I would say maybe the other half is yearning for honesty. I think we're going through a massively transformational time. And you can't be alive in the world and not feel that. You can't not feel it in your bones and sense it and just tap into it. Everywhere you go, everything you see, everything you hear, we're going through a massive transformation. People are waking up. The amount of suffering around us, whether it's the type of suffering we're experiencing in the U.S. or the type of suffering we're seeing overseas, we're really coming to a breaking point. And I think people are sick of the lies. They know that the system is broken. They know that the system is not working for them. So yes, while there's probably about half of the people that they love the way things are and they don't want to hear otherwise and they don't want the party to end, I'd say there are a good chunk of people who get that this is all broken. And I think there are so many people yearning for some brave person or several brave people to step forward and just say the fucking truth. Like, stop telling me the same regurgitated, just, put me to sleep bullshit that we hear over and over and over. People are yearning for the truth. They understand that the old way is breaking down and that there's something new coming in its place.
So it's like we need someone like Donald Trump, only with knowledge and values.
Exactly. And we can bash Donald Trump as much as we will, and there's plenty of hideous things about Donald Trump, but we do have to be clear-eyed about what he did to the American people. He galvanized a huge swath of people who were just disenchanted, and here was somebody who was a plain speaker. He didn't speak in this political jargon that just completely turns people off. He spoke in regular language, even less than regular language, and just said things that people wanted to hear. And of course, a lot of it was really dark, ugly stuff that people wanted to hear. He tapped into a really dark part of our collective consciousness. But as much as he did that for that portion of the people, look at what a Donald Trump, but with lightness instead of darkness, could galvanize in people. Again, I come back to kind of a Marianne Williamson, and that's what she campaigned upon, that she was the Donald Trump version on the light side instead of the dark side.
The parallel universe. The good witch.
Yeah.
So if we found that person, or that person existed or arose and appeared on the scene, so what are the fundamental truths that would be really important for them to communicate? Right.
So this kind of taps into kind of our elevator pitch and the core aspects of the narrative that we're trying to change. So say the first thing is that what we're being sold is that climate change is the central crisis that we face. Mm-hmm. And that the way we combat or solve climate change is by changing out fossil fuels and replacing them with so-called renewables. Mm-hmm. So this is the narrative, the very popular narrative. And what I would say to a Marianne Williamson or whoever is two things to counterpoint each of those, is that A, climate change is not our fundamental ecological crisis. Climate change is but one of many symptoms, parallel symptoms of ecological overshoot. Mm-hmm. And we could describe ecological overshoot kind of in a really simplistic way and maybe a little bit more refined way. So just in plain terms, if you've never heard of overshoot, it's too many people on the planet consuming and polluting too much. And this doesn't just apply to humans, as anybody who's familiar with ecology knows. Any species can overshoot its carrying capacity and then collapse. So we've heard the phrase overshoot and collapse. And another way to put it is that humanity has exceeded the regenerative and assimilative capacities of the planet, of the ecosphere. Mm-hmm. So we're consuming more resources than the planet can regenerate every year, and we're polluting more than the planet can assimilate. So ecological overshoot, too many of us putting too much of a burden on the planet, is our core ecological crisis. And climate change is just one of many symptoms. We've got deforestation, ocean acidification, topsoil loss. These are all parallel symptoms of overshoot.
Biodiversity loss, you name it, the whole litany. So that would be the first core part of our message, is that it's not climate change, it's overshoot. Then if you move on to the second point of, so-called renewables are what we need to solve climate change. Uh-huh. So we would say a couple things in response to that. First of all, if overshoot is our foundational crisis, the way you come back down from a state of overshoot is just that. You have to come down, you have to descend, you have to contract. So the main thing we need to focus on is a massive contraction of the human enterprise in every physical way. Massive contraction of population, reduction of population, contraction of the energy and material throughputs and outputs that we're using in our massive human system. So we need a contraction of the human enterprise in general. Then you look at what's being said about what we call faux renewables, solar and high-tech wind. And I like to say high-tech wind as opposed to kind of conventional low-tech wind, because wind turbines have been around for thousands of years. We're focused on these new modern high-tech wind turbines. Nuclear, some people include nuclear in the renewable mix, some don't. So the problem with these, and this is the astounding big lie that so many people have been duped into believing, is that these various technologies are renewable when they're not.
If you just stop and think about it, just stop and think about a solar panel, stop and think about a wind turbine, none of them can be built without fossil fuels. You look at the entire life cycle of any of these energy generating technologies, they require fossil fuels at every single step of the way, from mining the metals and minerals that go into building them, processing and refining those ores, transporting those materials all over the planet. The manufacturing processes themselves require extremely high temperatures that can't be generated without fossil fuels, without crude oil, without natural gas and coal. Then we transport them, particularly these huge wind turbines. I just drove by one today. It's a semi the length of about 4 semis. How do you do that without fossil fuels? So we transport these huge contraptions, long distances on these fossil-fueled semis. So they're subsidized at every step of the way by fossil fuels, and currently it is impossible for them to self-generate. They cannot be built with the energy that they themselves generate. So that's the first problem. And then, like I just alluded to, they're not renewable. They're built with non-renewable metals and minerals and other resources that, of course, we've vastly depleted during the industrial age. There's no low-hanging fruit left. What we have left is just, you can go online and look at the pictures and the videos. It's just disgusting. There are some pits that are, almost a mile deep, and it's these massive fossil-fueled trucks that, go down to extract the ore, massive water inputs that are required for these processes. I mean, the ecological devastation that results from extracting the building blocks of these so-called renewable energy technologies is just astounding. So if you pull back the curtain, if you just pull back the curtain of this shiny finished product, you'll see that it's anything but renewable. It's anything but green and clean. So I know that's a bit of a long-winded answer to what I would tell a politician, but problem isn't climate change, it's ecological overshoot. Mm-hmm. And then the way we solve climate change is not by just switching out fossil fuels with these faux renewables. These faux renewables are not actually renewable. They're not sustainable. And so the answer is to completely rethink life as we know it, a complete radical transformation that's involved in this descent process. And essentially, we're going back to what life before fossil fuels looked like. Life after fossil fuels is going to look like life before fossil fuels. And it's pretty common sense if you just think about it, but we don't want to think about it. It's pretty seductive to think that this way of life can go on forever.
So that's all.
That's all. That's all you have to incorporate into your campaign.
It would take someone of rare courage to want to speak the truth. So bless you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of us out there that are chipping away at trying to drill down to the truth and speak it.
There's some people, I'm thinking of, what's his name at Stanford, Jacobson, the guy who came up with the report that says we can run the world on renewable energy. What would drive him to want to push that message? What would drive 350.org to push that message? Or Bill McKibben? Bill McKibben's a pretty smart guy. He probably understands everything you've shared with me.
Right. And so, this is something that I think we've all spent a lot of time thinking about, all of us in this community who are aware of this message and pushing this message. To me, I think it's two things. One of them is more dominant. I think even these really smart people like Bill McKibben is a smart guy. Jacobson, PhD. You look at a lot of these energy transition plans. People with PhDs are writing them. They're being pumped out of these academic institutions, some of them very prestigious, Stanford and Princeton. I think what it is underlying all of it is that ultimately people do not want to face the reality that this way of life is going away. I really think it's as simple as that. And I think maybe in the case of Bill McKibben and some others, they've been captured by money and moneyed interests. So I think for certain swaths of this population, that's the case. I know academia to a certain extent has been captured by money and corporate interests, though I don't think to the extent that, say, maybe 350.org has been. But I really do think it's that simple. There's the profit mode. So you look at Greta, for example. Look at all the people behind Greta, the machine behind Greta, which is essentially Al Gore et al. You know, they're the ones, if you look at the work of Cory Morningstar, who's done extensive, phenomenal reporting on Greta, basically that's who's behind the whole Greta machine. You know, her mom was quite well connected with a fella and other people in Gore's circle. So you look at, say, maybe Gore and McKibben and those type of people, the Planet of the Humans kind of called out. I think they're very driven by a profit motive. And then there's the academics who I think the profit motive isn't really there, isn't influencing them. But I think it's just not being able to confront this reality that life as we know it is going away. And so they'll grasp at any straw possible to avoid facing that. That's my opinion.
Aside from that, which is plenty of obstacle in itself, just the average everyday citizen, you know, you've already mentioned that, you know, nobody wants, or most people don't want to believe that this party can't continue.
Right.
But do you think that on the other side, that if we're somehow able to rein all this in and resize the human enterprise and alter our level of energy uses and our sources of energy, a lot of people, I guess, are probably afraid that's a pretty ugly future full of sacrifice. Do you think it is? Is it?
I think that's the wrong way to frame it. And I think the way we frame a lot of this talk about energy and sustainability is not framed in the best way. So I would say we've become really accustomed to talking about what we want and what's desirable. And the cold truth is that being in a state of overshoot, we've really run up against these biophysical, ecological limits. To me, it really boils down to like a really juvenile mentality versus a mature adult mentality. And again, I think there are a lot of people that are waking up to a lot of this, but the people that are resisting, there's kind of this, you know, I don't mean this, you know, in a mean way by any means, but there's this childish, juvenile, we're clinging to Santa Claus and we just want to cling to the idea of the, you know, the tooth fairy because it's just really comforting and nice. It's not about what we want. It's not about what's desirable, at least in the physical, material realm. It's about what is possible. And what is possible is defined by ecological limits. And we've exceeded those limits for so long, and we could get away with exceeding them for a certain amount of time, but we're butting up against that. We can't get away with exceeding those limits anymore. So regardless of how painful or uncomfortable or undesirable this impending change might seem to people, and believe me, you know, I'm sure you and I don't find it all that alluring. I mean, I love my creature comforts. I'm not going to lie. I love being able to press a lever and take an endless hot shower. I mean, who wouldn't want that? I mean, I love getting in my car and being able to drive somewhere. So I'm not saying that it's like incredibly alluring and just wonderful for me to contemplate either, but we're either kids who bury our heads in the sand and don't face reality, or we're mature adults who say, hey, we've made bad decisions in the past collectively that have brought us to this really terrible point. And we got to face up to the consequences of the actions of our ancestors and the consequences of our own actions. And we have to do this, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, desirable or undesirable. This is the reality we face. And we either face it clear-eyed and sober and actually have a fighting chance of it being not so bad, or we just continue to bury our heads in the sand and say, oh, this is unpleasant. I don't want to go there. I don't want to think about it. And we go over the cliff hard. So it's up to us whether we want to be mature adults or just kind of put our, fingers in our ears and go, no, this isn't fun. This isn't full of glitter and rainbows. I don't want to hear it.
I don't know how good a metaphor this is, but let's say I'm tempted to try comparing it to like being at a party and overindulging. The human race has been overindulging for a few hundred years. If you're at a party and you're overindulging in alcohol, let's say, you're going to pay the price. The next morning, you're going to have a hangover. That might be the kind of the middle of the scenarios. It could be that you drink so much that you die.
Yeah.
Okay. Or it could be that you go to a party and you pace yourself and you have a couple drinks, you have a great time, and you don't pay a heavy price in the morning. You don't die. You don't have a hangover. Yeah. You had a pretty good time the night before.
Yeah. I think that's a great analogy.
Unfortunately, we've kind of lost that option of just having a couple drinks, because that would have required, if we had stopped growing the human population back at 1 billion people maybe or something like that, and we had resisted the allure of fossil fuels,
yes,
that would be the position we'd be in, right?
Yes, just think of what that trajectory could have been like. It could have been pretty wonderful. But yeah, you're right. We've forfeited that. That's no longer an option.
Yeah. So as a result, there's going to be some harder consequences.
Yes. There's no doubt that these physical material technologies that we've developed because of fossil fuels over the last 200 years, that they're pretty awesome. You cannot doubt that. We've developed some incredible, amazing physical technologies. Mm-hmm. But there's no free lunch. I mean, that's what, like the fundamental tenet of ecology. There's no free lunch. And so we made our decision to just binge. Like you said, we didn't go to the party and just have a couple drinks and really enjoy ourselves and be able to keep doing that every night. We decided to go to the party and just get super high and, drink and eat everything. And we had a really fun time while we did it. And we had some really amazing experiences with these amazing toys. But it all, there was a price to all of that. And we're facing that price right now.
Yeah, and the honest price really is, would you say it? Collapse, or the end of human civilization, potentially.
Absolutely. I think, if we continue on our current trajectory with essentially no changes, absolutely, civilization as we know it, modern techno-industrial civilization will collapse. It's just a matter of exactly when it happens and exactly how it unfolds. Nobody can predict that.
You're not going to give me a date?
I will not give you a date and make a wager on it, no. So yeah, that's a foregone conclusion. Like I said, it's just a matter of when. Could we go extinct? Sure. I mean, I would think some humans would survive, particularly the hunter-gatherers that still exist on the planet today that never got sucked into modernity. Mm-hmm. They would certainly survive, I would think. So absolutely, modern civilization will collapse if we keep going the way we're going, and billions and billions will die.
But there's another future, you think, potentially, if we can fall out of love with that narrative of endless growth and pleasure. Where would that take us?
We're so late in the party. And particularly from a climate standpoint, we have very little time left. Mm-hmm. So we don't have a lot of time left to turn the ship around. And we know that, and a lot of people know that. It's a tall order that we're trying to do. I mean, our goal is to try to engineer a planned, intelligent descent as opposed to letting nature just do it chaotically. Mm-hmm. But looking at what that would require, that requires first a massive paradigm shift in at least enough of humanity that we can get this going, that we can get momentum. That in and of itself is a really tall order, and especially doing it in a few years is a very tall order. Then, assuming we can get enough momentum in that regard, then we would need governments probably to step in and, nationalize the oil companies, establish a plan for their phase out. In the meantime, we have to dismantle fossil-fueled civilization and get the bones, the skeleton of a new, truly biomass-based, essentially renewable civilization in its place. We need to plan migrations away from vulnerable coastlines and whatnot. So What are the odds that all that is going to happen in 10 years or even 20 years? Slim to none. But what are you going to do other than try? And just, as we say on our website, I heard Lawrence Lessig say this in a podcast once, and it absolutely struck a chord in me. He said, he's fighting for democracy reform. And he said once, I realize that this is an uphill battle and maybe it's a battle that won't be won. But he said we have to act as if success is possible and give every ounce of energy to the battle. And I think that's the only mentality we can really have right now. I know we're so late in the game on so much of this, everything humanity faces. And I know a lot of people have kind of thrown their hands up in the air and said, well, it's just too late. Shit's going down. And that may very well be the case. And if that's the response you feel called to, then fine. But anybody who doesn't have that calling, anybody who feels called to try to keep fighting to the very end, is it possible? Sure. Theoretically, it's possible, but it's going to take a lot of effort.
How much of that paradigm shift do you think will require systems change versus how much can individuals contribute to that?
Obviously, it has to start with individuals. Any systems change has to start with change on an individual level. And I really think that's happening a lot right now. Like I said, I think people are waking up. People realize that things are broken. People realize that this is no way to live. So many people are unhappy. So I do think that change is starting on an individual level. Again, like what portion of, say, the U.S., has kind of undergone at least a good bit of that paradigm transformation? I don't know. But I'd like to think enough that we could gather enough momentum that if we all came together in a concerted effort, we could push things forward. But yeah, it has to start with individuals. And then those in power don't willingly give up their power. Those in power don't choose to do what is right. History shows it has always been the people who force change on the government. It's only when the government, when their hand is forced and their back is up against a wall and they have no choice, that's when they enact sweeping change and do the right thing. So we need to get back in touch. Kind of when enough of us have gone through this individual paradigm transformation and awakening, I don't know what other people think, but it's my belief that we really have to get back in touch with that revolutionary spirit where we're willing to put our lives on the line and take real risks, to not just do the weekend protests, which while those are symbolic, when have those ever actually created real change? We have to do some really intelligent, on-the-ground, direct action to force the hand of these people in power who aren't just going to do what's right because they're compromised.
I'm tempted to conclude then that Real Green New Deal isn't lobbying for legislative changes and other government policy changes. That's not a focus for you.
We have kind of a three-pronged focus. One is just to generate the awareness, just to get this message out there, to cut through the lies, to cut through the deception. Uh-huh. So that's just first and foremost, we want to do that. If we can go beyond that, there's kind of a two-pronged approach or aim beyond that. Because I'm a big believer in yin and yang, of pursuing multiple things at the same time, balance of opposites. So absolutely, I think it's important to engage politicians in enacting legislative change. Why would you not try that? There are some good politicians out there.
If the people do a good job of leading, that's the result, is that you do get the legislative change.
Yes, and if we stop electing establishment politicians into office, that's another big thing. These people don't just kind of magically fall there. We put them there. So we have to start electing people into office who are outside of the system, who are thinking outside of the box. Try to work with and that's a big part of my focus right now. Is I'm reaching out more to political candidates than I am actually politicians who are already in office, because I think there's more potential there. So yes, try to enact legislation, try to work on that front, while also pursuing that more kind of radical, revolutionary, on-the-ground, direct action front. I think you have to pursue both in tandem.
Do you think there are a number of people who can't do anything, that the system has them handcuffed, or is there something everyone can do?
I think there's something everybody can do. There's an infinite number of things we can all do. You know, we all have our own gifts, our own unique capabilities, our own passions, specific paths we're called to. So I think, that's part of that inner process of paradigm transformation is also going, okay, well, getting in touch with your soul, with your spirit. What do I feel called to do? There are unlimited amount of ways we can all contribute to trying to usher in the new world.
A few examples, maybe?
We're all in our own uniquely bad positions in ways that we are handicapped and constrained by the broken system. And so all I can say is, again, just start on an individual level to do everything you can to be the best person you can be, to try to lift the veil of ignorance and see these ecological realities and face them head on, and do whatever you can using your capabilities in the way you feel called to contribute to building the new world. And for some of us, that might be a lot more directly involved and radical than others, but that's up to each individual to determine what they feel called to do.
Well, it seems to me like there's nothing more central, more fundamental, more important.
We have this holistic vantage point. We're trying to pull in all the different, it's not just about energy. It's not just about population. It's, not just about social issues or empire. It's all of them intertwined, interconnected.
Right.
So we do come from that vantage point. So it's great to hear that you think that that's valuable.
Yeah, you put it all together. So if someone goes and checks out the organization, and you can do that at realgnd.org.
Correct. Yeah.
Is there a donate button front and center, easy to find right now?
I don't know that's front and center, but it's certainly up on the,
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Because we don't have a lot of time.
No, we don't have a lot of time.
That was Megan Seibert, founder and executive director of the Real Green New Deal Project. Check the show notes for links to her project and other relevant resources. July 11th is World Population Day, and I want to recommend an important program to you. Scientists Warning Europe is hosting a global webinar. What is a sustainable population? Why, when, and what should we do about it? Speakers include Dr. Phoebe Barnard of Scientists Warning Europe, Bill Reese, co-originator of ecological footprint analysis, Chris Tucker, chair of the American Geographical Society and author of A Planet of 3 Billion, and Jane O'Sullivan, representing the Overpopulation Project. The event is at noon U.S. Eastern Daylight Time, 5 p.m. in the UK, on Sunday, July 11th, World Population Day. I'll put a link in the show notes. This concludes our visit to the Reality Zone. Don't forget to explore issues at growthbusters.org. We now return you to your usual pro-growth programming.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather. But no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.